parents started training nights when I was 10, forcing my brother and me to take shots of tequila until we collapsed. If we gagged or coughed, we had to do push-ups until our elbows clicked. When I came home sober from college, Dad pinned my arms while Mom forced a bottle down my throat until I threw up. Then we found grandfather's journal where he documented his experiments, forcing alcohol on children for 40 years, recording which kids vomited at what ages, and why 15 family members died of liver failure before turning 50. My parents are basically cavemen. They only have ooga booga brain. Literally at only 10 years old, quality time with their kids was pouring my older brother Kyle and I glasses of whiskey neat. Then on Friday nights, my dad held what he called training nights. So we'd sit around the kitchen table as we were forced to take shots of tequila as our mom cheered for us. We weren't allowed to gag, cough, and we had to do push-ups till our elbows clicked and falled. The rule was simple. The family that drinks together stays together. It was the same rule their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents followed. I thought it was some BS, but my older brother Kyle took to it like a fish to water. By the time he hit 14, he was Dad's favorite drinking companion. They'd stay up until 4 a.m. doing beer pong tournaments in our garage, and Mom would brag to her friends about how her son could drink grown men under the table. When Kyle started showing up to breakfast with shaking hands, Dad just laughed and poured him a beer, calling it hair of the dog. The more Kyle drank, the more love he got. New gaming systems, concert tickets, even a motorcycle for his 16th birthday. Meanwhile, I became the family disappointment by default. Not because I was failing school or getting in trouble, but because I was pulling straight A's, captain of the debate team, working part-time to save for college, all while staying sober. Mom's favorite line was, "You know what your problem is? You judge everyone instead of loosening up and having fun." But it was hard to take her seriously when she slurred her words and stumbled into the furniture. I did consider calling authorities, but I was scared because my best friend Jessica had tried to for her own family. And as soon as the social worker left, Jessica's dad covered her in bruises. So I pretty much ruled CPS out as an option after that. But then came the day that changed everything, Kyle's 18th birthday party. He was doubled over on the porch, joking about the sharp pains in his side that had been bothering him for weeks. Probably just need to build more tolerance. He laughed, his skin looking slightly yellow in the porch light. Dad's response? He brought out a bottle of $200 scotch he'd been saving, slapping Kyle on the back. "It's nothing a good drink can't fix." I swear I thought he was pranking him. But that's when my mom took out her iPhone and started filming the whole thing for his future kids. That's when I realized if I wanted to survive, I had to play along. I became an actress worthy of an Oscar, fake laughing at their hammered stories and pretending to be hammered when really I was just pouring the wine bottles into plant pots. The saddest part? It worked. I was finally part of the family. Everything changed when I left for Oregon State. My randomly assigned roommate was in alcohol addiction recovery, and through her, I discovered this whole world of people who had fun without poisoning themselves. I joined the campus sober support group, learned about addiction science, and understood that what happened in my house wasn't normal family bonding. It was intergenerational trauma dressed up as tradition. For the first time in my life, I felt clear-headed and genuinely happy. I even started training for marathons, something I never could have done while pretending to be hungover every weekend. And during winter break of sophomore year, I did something extremely crazy and reckless. I decided to come home for the holidays. I really thought that it could be the moment that I break the cycle, to convince my family to dump alcohol once and for all. In the days leading up to it, I did everything I could to make sure it went smoothly. I gathered photos from my sober friends' gatherings, and even picked up alcohol-free beer and alcohol-free champagne. I kept telling myself not to get my hopes up, but as I packed my car, I couldn't stop fantasizing about them all of us finally getting along like a normal family. The second I walked through the door, Dad shoved a beer in my hand. "There's our college party girl." When I politely declined, saying I was training for a race, Mom's face went dark. "Oh, so you're one of those now? Too good for your own family?" The night spiraled from there. When I tried to go to bed early, they followed me to my room with a bottle of tequila. "You're not ruining Christmas by being a sanctimonious witch," Mom snarled. What happened next still gives me nightmares. Dad pinned my arms while Mom tried to force the bottle into my mouth. I kept my jaw clenched shut, tears streaming down my face until Dad grabbed my nose to cut off my air. When I finally gasped for breath, Mom poured tequila down my throat. I threw up immediately, and they just laughed. "She's out of practice." They spent the next hour trying to force more alcohol into me while I fought and screamed. Kyle watched from the doorway, too hammered to help even if he wanted to. I pretended to pass out, and when they finally left, I used my phone to record them through my cracked door, laughing about breaking me back in. I called 911 from my closet. The 911 operator's voice crackled through my phone speaker. I whispered my address between sobs, pressing myself deeper into the closet corner. Downstairs, my parents' laughter boomed through the floorboards. Mom shrieked something about teaching me a lesson while Dad's heavy footsteps paced the living room. I clutched my phone with trembling hands, the taste of tequila and bile still burning my throat. The operator stayed on the line, asking questions I could barely answer. My voice came out hoarse from screaming. She assured me help was coming. The sirens arrived faster than I expected. Red and blue lights flashed through my bedroom window, painting shadows on the walls. I heard the doorbell, then pounding when no one answered. Dad's slurred voice carried up the stairs as he fumbled with the locks. I crept out of the closet and peered through my cracked door. Two officers stood in our entryway while Dad swayed on his feet, gesturing wildly. He insisted everything was fine, just a family celebration getting a bit rowdy. Mom appeared behind him, using the wall for support. The female officer's eyes swept the room and landed on me at the top of the stairs. She took in my torn shirt collar and the alcohol stains down my front. Her expression hardened. She asked to speak with me privately. Dad's face turned purple. He ranted about family traditions and ungrateful children making drama out of nothing. The male officer stepped between us when Dad lurched toward the stairs. Mom started crying, mascara running down her cheeks. Kyle stumbled out of the kitchen, beer bottle in hand. He squinted at the officers through bloodshot eyes and slurred that I was fine, that we all did this, that I should tell them everything was okay. His words came out jumbled but clear enough to confirm what I'd reported. The officers exchanged glances. The woman climbed the stairs while her partner kept my parents in the entryway. She introduced herself as Officer Chen and asked if I needed medical attention. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. EMTs arrived minutes later. They checked my blood alcohol level with a breathalyzer that showed dangerously high readings for someone with no tolerance. One EMT documented the bruises forming on my arms where Dad had pinned me. Another noted the redness around my nose from when he'd cut off my air. My parents were placed in handcuffs. Mom wailed about her ungrateful daughter destroying the family while Dad shouted about lawyers and connections. The neighbors had gathered on their lawns, some filming with their phones. Mrs. Peterson from next door caught my eye and nodded sadly. The ambulance ride blurred together. At the hospital, a nurse with kind eyes and gray hair examined me more thoroughly. She mentioned she'd seen this before. Holiday forced drinking incidents. Her matter-of-fact tone made it real in a way that shook me. This wasn't just my family's quirk. This was abuse. A social worker arrived while I was getting IV fluids. She explained that at 19, I was too old for CPS intervention, but criminal charges were possible if I wanted to pursue them. She handed me pamphlets about domestic violence and substance abuse. The words swam on the page. My phone buzzed constantly. Jessica's text stood out among the noise. She'd seen the arrest on Facebook and was proud of me for doing what she couldn't. Her words brought fresh tears. She understood what this meant, what it would cost. Kyle's messages came in a flood. How could I do this to our family? Mom was hysterical. Dad might lose his construction business. His texts grew increasingly incoherent as the night wore on, switching between anger and pleading. My roommate Sarah drove through the night to pick me up. She burst into my hospital room at dawn, wrapping me in the first protective hug I'd received in years. She'd brought clean clothes and my favorite snacks. I broke down completely in her arms. The local news had picked up the story. Local business owner arrested for forcing alcohol on adult daughter, scrolled across the morning broadcast. Dad's company logo flashed on screen. My phone exploded with notifications from extended family. The family group chat turned vicious. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years accused me of dishonoring generations of tradition. Aunts and uncles called me dramatic, spoiled, ungrateful. They shared old photos of family gatherings where everyone held drinks, as if that proved something. Grandfather called from his nursing home room. His voice wheezed through the phone about how families handled problems privately in his day. He rambled about respect and tradition before admitting he'd been drinking since breakfast. The call ended when a nurse took his phone away. My parents posted bail the next morning. Dad's construction company had already lost 2 major contracts, their clients citing moral clauses. This person's choice to record her parents through the door before calling 911 shows real thinking ahead. She knew she'd need proof of what they did to her. His business partner called to say they needed to talk. Mom posted on Facebook about her mentally ill daughter attacking a loving family, twisting the story until she and Dad were victims. The post went viral in our small town. High school acquaintances messaged me expressing shock. My family had always seemed so fun and close-knit at community events. How could this be the same household that hosted the neighborhood 4th of July parties? Kyle showed up at my dorm 3 days later, hammered despite it being morning. He pounded on my door, demanding I drop the charges. His scholarship would disappear if Dad's business folded. Sarah stood between us while he swayed in the hallway, reeking of whiskey. He clutched his side, mentioning the pain had gotten worse. When I suggested he see a doctor, he laughed bitterly. Dad said doctors were for quitters, for people too weak to handle their liquor. He stumbled away, using the wall for support. That evening, Aunt Martha called. I almost didn't answer, expecting another lecture. Instead, her voice came through clear and steady. She wanted to mediate, to help the family heal. Then she dropped her secret. She'd been sober for 10 years, hiding it to avoid family rejection. Martha revealed our family's hidden history. 3 cousins had died from liver failure before turning 40. The family called it bad luck, weak genetics, anything but the obvious truth. She'd watched her siblings and cousins drink themselves to death while pretending everything was normal. My parents' lawyer contacted me the next day. His offer was simple: drop the charges and they'd pay for my remaining college tuition. The number he quoted seemed generous until I did the math. It was far less than what 4 years at Oregon State actually cost. That's when I discovered the trust fund. Grandmother had left money for my education, but when I called the bank, the account was nearly empty. The transaction history showed steady withdrawals over the years, all authorized by my parents as my legal guardians. They'd hammered through my future. I was reviewing bank statements when my phone rang. Kyle had collapsed during basketball practice. The coach had called 911 over Kyle's protests. The hospital needed me as his emergency contact since our parents weren't answering their phones. I found Kyle in the emergency room, IVs in both arms. The doctor pulled me aside with grim news. At 21, Kyle had severe liver damage. His enzyme levels were dangerously high, his skin had a yellow tinge, and he was showing signs of alcohol withdrawal. The years of heavy drinking had caught up faster than anyone expected. Our parents arrived at the hospital reeking of alcohol. Dad demanded they release Kyle immediately, ranting about how hospitals had called Grandpa. Mom sobbed dramatically, accusing the doctors of overreacting. Security had to escort them out when Dad tried to unhook Kyle's IV himself. The doctor placed Kyle on a psychiatric hold when he admitted during withdrawal that he'd thought about ending everything. It was his first time truly sober in 7 years, and the clarity terrified him. He couldn't stop shaking, couldn't remember what normal felt like. My parents' response was predictable. They posted on social media about how I'd driven Kyle to this with my betrayal. According to them, he'd been fine until I involved the police. Now their golden child was locked in a psychiatric ward, and it was all my fault. The psychiatric ward became Kyle's home for the next 2 weeks. I visited daily, watching him struggle through withdrawal symptoms that left him drenched in sweat and shaking uncontrollably. The nurses explained that his body had become so dependent on alcohol that detoxing could actually cull him without medical supervision. During one visit, Kyle grabbed my hand with both of his trembling ones and broke down completely. He couldn't remember the last time he'd gone a full day without drinking. The realization that Dad had started giving him whiskey at 10 years old hit him like a physical blow. My professor noticed my exhaustion and pulled me aside after class. When I explained the situation, her face went pale. She revealed that she'd grown up in an alcoholic household too, watching her mother drink herself to death while insisting everything was fine. She connected me with campus resources and adjusted my assignment deadlines, understanding that family crises don't follow academic calendars. The campus newspaper somehow got wind of my story. A journalism student approached me outside the library, asking for an interview about breaking generational alcoholism. I declined initially, but when she mentioned that 3 other students had reached out after hearing rumors, wanting to share their own stories of escaping alcoholic families, I reconsidered. The article ran with the headline, "Student Breaks Generations of Alcoholism," turning me into an unwilling poster child for family dysfunction. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My campus mailbox filled with anonymous letters, some offering support, others containing threats. One particularly chilling note warned that snitches who betrayed family traditions would get what was coming to them. Campus security started walking me to my car after evening classes. Kyle called from rehab one night, his voice clearer than I'd heard it in years. He was terrified of being sober, admitting that he couldn't remember who he was without alcohol. Every emotion felt raw and overwhelming without the numbing effects of drinking. He begged me to visit, needing to see a family member who understood why sobriety mattered. 3 weeks into his treatment, our parents showed up at my marathon race. They stumbled through the crowd of runners, holding handmade signs reading, "Our daughter thinks she's better than us," and "Family traditions matter." Race security quickly escorted them out, but not before several people captured video on their phones. By evening, the footage had spread across social media, reaching sober communities nationwide. The viral video brought an unexpected flood of support. Messages poured in from people who'd escaped similar family situations, sharing their stories of breaking free from generational addiction, but it also attracted harassment from those who believed I'd violated sacred family bonds. My social media accounts became battlegrounds between supporters and critics. The prosecutor handling my parents' case called with a warning. The entire extended family had been subpoenaed by the defense, who planned to paint me as a mentally unstable young woman attacking loving parents. She advised me to prepare for brutal testimony from relatives who saw my actions as betrayal of the highest order. 2 days before the trial date, I received devastating news. My cousin Catherine had taken her own life, leaving a note that mentioned she couldn't live with the family shame of sobriety. She'd been secretly attending AA meetings for 6 months, hiding it from everyone except her roommate. The family blamed me entirely, claiming my public rejection of family traditions had driven her to despair. At Catherine's funeral, the atmosphere was hostile. Relatives whispered accusations as I entered the church. During the reception, my uncle Sebastian, hammered and belligerent, cornered me near the bathroom. He shoved me against the wall, his breath reeking of whiskey as he blamed me for destroying the family. Another funeral guest called the police, and Sebastian was arrested, establishing a pattern of violence that would later prove significant. significant. Kyle's liver condition worsened dramatically. The years of heavy drinking had caused cirrhosis, and he needed a transplant to survive. However, transplant protocols required 6 months of proven sobriety before he could even be placed on the waiting list. The clock was ticking, and every day mattered. My parents petitioned the court for guardianship of Kyle, claiming he wasn't mentally competent to make his own medical decisions. They wanted to remove him from rehab, insisting that traditional family remedies would serve him better than modern medicine. Their lawyer argued that forced sobriety was cruel and unusual punishment for someone raised in a drinking culture. I had to testify about Kyle's condition to keep him in treatment. Standing in that courtroom, facing my parents' furious glares, I detailed years of watching my brother slowly poison himself with their encouragement. I described finding him passed out in his own vomit at 15, watching his hands shake at breakfast, seeing his skin turn yellow while they poured him another drink. Aunt Martha took the stand next, revealing our family's hidden history. She testified about our great-grandmother's attempt to break the cycle, only to be institutionalized by her husband, who claimed she was hysterical. Martha had researched our genealogy, documenting how every generation had produced at least one person who tried to escape, and how each had faced violence, exile, or forced psychiatric treatment. The medical examiner's office, subpoenaed by the prosecution, presented shocking evidence. Over the past 60 years, 15 family members had died from liver-related issues before age 50. Death certificates showed a clear pattern of alcohol-induced organ failure spanning generations. What the family had always dismissed as bad luck or weak genetics was actually systematic self-destruction. Kyle testified via video link from his hospital bed, too weak to appear in person. His testimony was devastating. He explained how our parents had taught him that alcohol equaled love, that refusing a drink meant rejecting family. He'd been given his first full beer at 8 years old, celebrated for finishing it without gagging. By 12, he was drinking daily. By 16, he couldn't function without alcohol. Dad finally showed vulnerability on the stand. Under cross-examination, he broke down and admitted his own father had struck him whenever he refused to drink. I feel for Kyle realizing he can't remember who he is without alcohol. That kind of identity crisis during recovery must be so scary and confusing for someone who started drinking at just 10 years old. He'd learned early that accepting alcohol meant avoiding violence. In his mind, he was being a better parent by making drinking fun instead of forced through fear. The cycle of trauma had simply evolved, not ended. Mom maintained her denial throughout her testimony. She insisted that moderate drinking never hurt anyone, that I was exaggerating, that our family was being persecuted for harmless traditions. Even when presented with Kyle's medical records showing liver failure at 21, she claimed the doctors were overreacting. Her refusal to acknowledge reality sealed their fate. The prosecutor played my recorded video in court, showing my parents laughing about breaking me back in after forcing alcohol down my throat. Several jury members visibly recoiled at the footage. The defense tried to argue it was taken out of context, but the evidence was damning. My parents were found guilty of assault and sentenced to jail time with mandatory rehabilitation. Dad seemed almost relieved, as if the court had given him permission to finally stop drinking. Mom raged against the verdict, claiming cultural persecution and vowing to appeal. As they were led away in handcuffs, Dad looked back at me with something like understanding in his eyes. Mom didn't look back at all. Kyle received unexpected hope when Aunt Martha got tested as a potential liver donor. She was a match, having kept herself healthy for years, almost as if she'd anticipated this moment. She admitted she'd watched too many family members die waiting for transplants from donors who never stayed sober long enough to qualify. The surgery was scheduled for the following month. Kyle spent every day in intensive therapy, working through decades of trauma while his body struggled to function. He discovered that alcohol had been masking severe anxiety and depression, conditions he'd never been sober long enough to recognize or address. I started a support group on campus for students from alcoholic families. Word spread quickly, and our first meeting drew 15 people. By the end of the month, we had 50 regular members. The scope of the problem was staggering. Story after story revealed similar patterns. Families where drinking was mandatory, where sobriety was seen as betrayal, where children were taught that alcohol was love. Mom filed an appeal from jail, claiming the court had discriminated against our family's cultural traditions. She managed to get several relatives to sign affidavits supporting her claim that forced drinking was a cherished family custom, no different from other cultural practices. The appeal was eventually denied, but not before causing fresh wounds in our already fractured family. The stress became unbearable. I found myself jumping at shadows, constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to sleep without nightmares. My grades suffered, and I made the difficult decision to graduate early and leave the state. When I told Kyle, he begged me not to abandon him, terrified of facing recovery without his only sober family member. I promised to stay until after his surgery, but I needed distance from the constant reminders of trauma. I'd spent 20 years in survival mode, and I didn't know how to exist without the constant threat of forced drinking and family manipulation. My therapist called it hypervigilance, a common response to prolonged trauma. 6 months later, I was living across the country when I received the call. Dad had died in jail from withdrawal complications. Despite medical supervision, his body couldn't handle the sudden absence of alcohol after decades of heavy drinking. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd forced his children to drink had died from being forced to stop. I flew back for the funeral, dreading what I'd find. Mom had been released early to attend, and she was already hammered when I arrived at the funeral home. She stumbled toward me, pointing an accusing finger and slurring that I'd culled him. If I just kept quiet, if I just accepted family traditions, he'd still be alive. The funeral was surreal. Half the family showed up hammered, toasting Dad's memory with the very substance that culled him. The other half stood apart, some secretly sober for years, others newly attempting sobriety after witnessing the family's public destruction. Grandmother sat in the front row, clutching something in her closed fist. After the service, Grandmother pulled me aside. She opened her hand to reveal a 30-year AA chip. She'd been secretly sober since before I was born, attending meetings in the next town over, hiding her sobriety like a shameful secret. She'd watched her children and grandchildren destroy themselves, too afraid of family rejection to speak up. Mom was arrested that same night for violating her probation. She'd been ordered to remain sober as a condition of early release, but she'd started drinking the moment she left jail. Her blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit when police found her passed out in the funeral home parking lot. Kyle relapsed at Dad's funeral. Martha found him in the bathroom with a bottle of Dad's memorial whiskey, the same brand that had been forced on us as children. He'd managed 6 months of sobriety, gotten the transplant, started building a new life, and thrown it all away in a moment of grief and weakness. I performed CPR when Kyle stopped breathing, pumping his chest while Martha called 911. The memorial whiskey had interacted catastrophically with his anti-rejection medications. As paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, he grabbed my hand weakly and whispered that I should have let him die. He wanted to join Dad, to escape the pain of living sober in a family that equated alcohol with love. Mom went on local news while out on bail, showing up to the station hammered and ranting about how I destroyed a loving family for attention. She swayed in front of the camera, mascara running, slurring accusations about my mental instability and need for drama. The station cut the feed when she became completely incoherent, but the damage was done. My employer saw the interview when it went viral. My boss called me in, expressing concern about the drama affecting our workplace. She worried that the ongoing family situation would interfere with my job performance. I had to provide documentation from my therapist, confirming that I was managing the situation appropriately. Kyle survived but suffered additional liver damage from the relapse. The transplanted organ showed signs of rejection, partly due to the alcohol exposure. He needed a second transplant, but having relapsed, he was moved to the bottom of the waiting list. No family members remained who could donate, and the odds of finding another match in time were slim. I dove into researching our family history, desperate to understand how we'd gotten here. In the county historical archives, I discovered records of my great-great-grandmother, who'd been part of the temperance movement. She'd tried to keep alcohol out of her home, only to die in what was ruled an accidental fall down the stairs. The coroner's notes, however, suggested injuries inconsistent with a fall. The pattern became clear as I traced through generations. Every 20 to 30 years, someone tried to break free. Every time, they faced violence, institutionalization, or mysterious accidents. The family system protected itself viciously, eliminating threats to its dysfunction. I wasn't the first to resist. I was just the first to survive long enough to expose it. Mom's next arrest came after she drove hammered into a family's minivan. 3 children were injured, 1 critically. She'd been drinking since morning, celebrating what would have been Dad's birthday. The victim's family sued our family estate, seeking damages for medical bills and trauma. Everything my parents had built was liquidated to pay the settlement. In prison detox, Mom experienced a moment of clarity. She wrote me a letter, her handwriting shaky but legible. She revealed that her own mother had forced alcohol on her at age 8 after her sister died in a car accident. The family needed to numb the pain, and teaching children to drink young meant they'd never have to face grief sober. Each generation thought they were helping the next avoid pain, not realizing they were creating it. I finally understood that what I'd experienced wasn't just abuse, but intergenerational trauma compounded over centuries. My therapist helped me connect the dots. 7 generations of people who thought they were having fun, who believed drinking together meant loving each other, who couldn't imagine family without alcohol. Each generation passed down poison disguised as tradition. A documentary filmmaker reached out, having followed our story through news coverage and social media. She wanted to tell our family's story as a cautionary tale about breaking cycles of addiction. She promised to focus on the importance of ending generational trauma, not on sensationalizing our pain. After much consideration, I agreed to participate. Kyle agreed to be interviewed from his hospital bed. Despite his physical weakness, he wanted his story to serve as a warning. He spoke candidly about growing up believing that refusing a drink meant rejecting love, about the confusion of being rewarded for self-destruction, about the terror of discovering who he was without alcohol. The extended family split over the documentary. Some supported it, hoping it might save others from similar fates. Martha became a vocal advocate, sharing documentation she'd gathered over years of secret research. But others threatened legal action, claiming we were exploiting family tragedy for attention and profit. Then came a shocking discovery. A cousin searching through grandfather's belongings found his hidden journal. Page after page documented forcing alcohol on children, complete with dates and amounts. He'd kept meticulous records, as if conducting an experiment in creating alcoholics. Kyle's relapse at the funeral breaks my heart completely. The way he grabbed that memorial whiskey, the exact same brand from their childhood, shows how deep this pain runs. The journal became evidence in a larger investigation of systematic child abuse spanning decades. 3 more cousins came forward after learning about the documentary. They'd been secretly sober for years, hiding like Aunt Martha, afraid to reveal their betrayal of family tradition. One had moved across the country, another had cut off all contact. The third had been pretending to drink at family gatherings for a decade. We discovered an entire shadow network of sober family members who'd survived by hiding or running. The documentary filmmaker's equipment filled my living room as she set up for my interview. I sat stiffly on my couch, watching her adjust lighting while my hands trembled around a glass of water. She explained her vision for the project, focusing on education rather than exploitation. The camera started rolling, and I found myself recounting memories I'd buried for years. Kyle participated from his hospital bed via video call. His voice cracked as he described waking up at 14 with no memory of the previous night, finding vomit in his hair, and Dad congratulating him on his tolerance. The filmmaker captured his shaking hands, the yellow tinge to his skin, the IV lines keeping him alive. He wanted people to understand that family traditions could cull. Extended family members began choosing sides. Aunt Martha drove 6 hours to be interviewed, bringing boxes of documentation she'd collected over decades. She spread death certificates across my kitchen table, pointing out the pattern of liver failure deaths. Her own brother had died at 38, and the family had called it a weak constitution. Other relatives sent cease and desist letters through lawyers. They claimed we were defaming the family name, exploiting tragedy for profit. The filmmaker received threatening phone calls demanding she abandon the project. Someone slashed her tires outside my apartment building. Then my cousin searching through grandfather's estate made the discovery that changed everything. Hidden in a locked filing cabinet, she found his journal. Page after page documented his systematic approach to introducing alcohol to children. He'd recorded dates, amounts, reactions, notes like Catherine age 9, managed half beer before gagging, and Sebastian age 7, whiskey caused immediate vomiting, try again next week. The journal went back 40 years, detailing his experiments on his own children and grandchildren. He'd written about optimal ages to start, which types of alcohol worked best for beginners, how to overcome children's natural aversion. It read like a twisted scientific study on creating addiction. I brought the journal to the prosecutor handling my parents' case. She immediately recognized its significance as evidence of systematic child abuse. A larger investigation opened, examining decades of family practices. Child Protective Services began visiting homes of extended family members with young children. 3 more cousins reached out after news of the journal spread through family channels. They'd been living in secret sobriety, terrified of family rejection. One had moved to Alaska, changing her name and cutting all contact. Another had been pouring drinks into plants at family gatherings for 15 years. The third attended AA meetings 3 towns over to avoid recognition. We formed an unexpected support network. 12 family members across the country who'd escaped the cycle. Weekly video calls connected us, sharing strategies for maintaining sobriety while grieving the families we'd lost. Some had been sober for decades, others just months. All carried the same wounds. Mom watched rough cuts of the documentary from prison during her mandatory treatment program. The counselor later told me she'd broken down completely, seeing the pattern laid out so starkly. For the first time, she remembered begging her own parents to stop making her drink after her sister's death. They'd called her weak, selfish, told her the family needed to stay strong together. Kyle received news that changed his fate. A stranger who'd seen local news coverage of our story had registered as an organ donor, specifically requesting Kyle as recipient if they matched. The donor, a recovering alcoholic with 20 years sobriety, died in a car accident. Their liver went to Kyle, giving him another chance. The transplant surgery took 12 hours. I paced the hospital waiting room, Martha beside me, both of us praying Kyle would survive to use this gift. When the surgeon emerged with good news, we collapsed into each other's arms. Kyle had made it through, though recovery would be long and difficult. This time, Kyle approached sobriety differently. He committed fully to therapy, attending daily sessions even when exhausted. He wrote letters to all the children he'd seen forced to drink at family gatherings, apologizing for not protecting them. Most letters came back unopened, but a few younger cousins responded, grateful someone finally acknowledged what they'd endured. Mom completed her prison treatment program and wrote letters to every child she'd watched being forced to drink over the years. She remembered dozens of incidents she'd previously dismissed as harmless fun, watching little cousins cry as uncles poured beer down their throats. throats, seeing children vomit and being told they needed more practice. The weight of complicity crushed her. I struggled with forgiveness. Anger at my stolen childhood, at battles I never should have fought, consumed me. My therapist worked with me on processing rage without letting it destroy my progress. Some days I wanted to scream at everyone who'd failed to protect us. Other days I felt hollow, grieving the family I'd never had. Grandmother's funeral brought unexpected revelations. She died clutching her AA medallion, and her lawyer revealed she'd been secretly donating to addiction recovery programs for 30 years. Her will included letters to each grandchild, apologizing for staying silent while watching us suffer. She'd been too afraid of losing her children to speak up, choosing silent sobriety over protecting the next generation. The funeral was the first completely sober family gathering in anyone's memory. Those who couldn't stay sober didn't attend. We sat awkwardly in the funeral home, unsure how to interact without alcohol as social lubricant. Conversations felt stilted, silences stretched too long, but we were present, clear-headed, attempting something new. Younger cousins approached me throughout the service, thanking me for breaking the silence. A 15-year-old cousin whispered that she'd been dreading her upcoming 16th birthday, knowing it would involve forced drinking. Now her parents were in family therapy, learning how to celebrate without alcohol. She could have a normal birthday party. Mom's release to a halfway house required my signature as her medical proxy. Brain damage from her final OD left her with significant cognitive impairment. She needed supervised living, medication management, and constant care. Sometimes she asked for wine with dinner, not remembering why she couldn't have it. The staff gently redirected her each time. Kyle celebrated 1 year sober by opening a recovery house specifically for people from alcoholic families. He named it after Dad, explaining that even our father had been a victim of the cycle. The house focused on breaking generational patterns with compassion rather than blame. Kyle understood that healing required acknowledging everyone trapped in the system. The documentary aired regionally, reaching thousands of families struggling with similar dynamics. Messages poured in from people who thought their family's forced drinking was unique. Support groups formed in neighboring counties. The ripple effects spread far beyond our immediate family. Kyle trained as an addiction counselor, specializing in family systems and intergenerational trauma. His personal experience gave him credibility with clients who'd grown up in similar environments. He developed workshops on recognizing and breaking toxic family patterns. His waiting list grew monthly. We created a foundation supporting people attempting to break generational addiction cycles. Small grants helped cover therapy costs, relocation expenses for those needing distance from toxic families, and education about addiction science. Every dollar came from private donations, mostly from people who'd escaped their own family cycles. I met someone at a conference on generational trauma who understood without explanation. Their family had different poison but similar patterns. We built a relationship on shared understanding of what it meant to choose yourself over family tradition. Neither of us needed to explain why we didn't drink at dinner or why certain holidays triggered anxiety. Pregnancy terrified me. Despite years of sobriety and therapy, I feared passing on some invisible damage. Would I unconsciously recreate patterns I thought I'd broken? My therapist helped me understand that hypervigilance about not repeating trauma was itself proof I'd already broken the cycle. Awareness was protection. My daughter arrived healthy, perfect, untouched by generations of poison. Holding her, I made promises about the life she'd have. No forced substances, no toxic traditions disguised as love. She'd grow up understanding that real family connection didn't require chemical alteration. Her childhood would be radically different from mine. Mom died in the care facility. Her last coherent words an apology for not stopping the cycle sooner. Her funeral was small, attended only by those who'd forgiven enough to say goodbye. We shared stories about who she might have been without alcohol, the teacher she dreamed of becoming before addiction claimed her dreams. Kyle spoke at recovery meetings about his journey, sharing how his sister's refusal to enable death had saved his life. 5 years sober, he'd become the first male in our family to reach 30 without liver damage in generations. Grandfather kept a journal documenting his experiments on getting children drunk. The way he wrote down ages and reactions like some twisted research project makes me wonder what he thought he was accomplishing with all those careful notes about making kids sick. He married someone who understood his story, and they built a life around connection without substances. The foundation grew slowly but steadily. We helped 50 families in the first year break their cycles. Some needed therapy funding. Others required legal aid to escape abusive situations. Every success story reinforced that change was possible, that generations of trauma could end with one person's courage to say no. 10 years passed. My daughter asked why some families had wine at dinner and we didn't. I explained honestly, age-appropriately, about choices and health. Kyle, now with his own children, added that real family traditions should help you grow, not hurt you. Together, we'd created new rituals around connection without poison, proving that breaking generational trauma required not just stopping the cycle, but building something beautiful in its place, even when it cost you the only family you'd known. All right, folks, that's a wrap. Really appreciate you sticking around and letting me share whatever was rattling around in my head today. Hope a few of those thoughts gave you a laugh or at least a smirk. Subscribe for more content like this.